Welcome to Dr. Tiffany Florvil from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque and to Dr. Silke Hackenesch from the University of Cologne. Well, you are currently preparing a joint seminar on Black Lives Matter and their historical legacies. Very hot topic, I'd say, and very interesting, not only in the US. Could you briefly just let us know how do you approach the issue and how do you combine the European and the American take on the movement? And maybe let's start with you, Tiffany.
Well, thank you for inviting us both for this interview. We try to combine it in an interesting way. So my students will tackle Black Lives Matter in the European perspective and sort of focusing on the longer legacy of Black Lives Matter in sort of earlier centuries. And Silke's class will focus on the sort of European the US dynamics of Black Lives Matter, also in earlier decades. And then together, our students will work on a project that allows them to sort of collaborate on thinking about and mapping Black Lives Matter on both the US and on the continent of Europe. And so I'll let Silke take some more before I sort of talk a lot.
Okay, so yes, so we decided not only it's a timely, relevant, and important topic, but it's also a topic that integrates both our research areas. So Tiffany is a specialist in Afro-German studies and Black diaspora, Black European studies, and a lot of my research also focuses on processes of racialization and race formation in the US history. And so we decided that it's important to teach a class on Black Lives Matter, but that it would be especially intriguing also for our students to do so from a global perspective and with a strong perspective on historical legacies.
Thank you. If I got that right, Tiffany, you are a scholar of the African diaspora in Germany, and Silke Hackenesch is a scholar of African American heritage. This is very interesting to have this crosswise distribution of competences. What is the didactic impact of such a crossing perspective?
Oh, I think from a pedagogical perspective, will lend itself to fruitful exchanges for our students. Meeting with other students who are engaging in similar topics in terms of thinking about broader understanding of racialization, the global impacts of white supremacy, the global impacts of the carceral state. And I think especially for students here in New Mexico who oftentimes don't have a chance to travel abroad, this is a fabulous opportunity to allow them to connect with other students, particularly other sort of international students. And I think in terms of, as Silke beautifully said, that both of our research interests deals with aspects of racialization, identity. And so it seems like a natural trajectory for us. We've collaborated in a variety of other ways in terms of our research interests. And I think now this collaborative pedagogical approach is just going to be really fruitful for our own work and thinking about how do we approach this? How do we maybe we'll eventually approach this in thinking about writing a book about Black Lives Matter pedagogically and so on.
Very interesting. Silke Hackenesch, the course is not only born out of joint interests, but you also teach jointly. Have you had any prior experience in tandem teaching, and what is your take on that in terms of practically how to arrange for joint teaching? Do you do it one after the other, or are you jointly presenting in class?
Yeah, of course, these were questions we had to grapple with as well when we came up with this idea, because this is the first time that I'm teaching digitally in cooperation with a colleague. So this is certainly new, as a new format for us. And for the Cologne students, it means that we run on a different semester schedule a little bit. So we start in March and end in May. So that we have some overlap with the students from New Mexico. The class itself, of course, is again taught remotely. So we will have Zoom sessions, which is not so unfamiliar for us as teachers and for the students as well. And we will have some joint sessions where we bring students together. And then, as Tiffany mentioned, we have identified a number of topics that we want to ask the students to work on in smaller groups. and the results of these group projects will then be featured on the website. And I think it will be a great experience. I'm sure. I'm very much looking forward to it. And I think for the students, it's also a unique opportunity to enter a conversation with students they are usually not exposed to. And here, our students, in our program, North American Studies, it's a pretty international and diverse group, but they cherish the idea of having broader discussions and contacts and possibly friendships with American students.
Indeed, the intercontinental aspect is something that I'd like to know a little more about it. Tiffany, do you think the intercultural peculiarities of that course will also affect the way that course will work? I mean, are you going to have, for example, mixed groups, and do you think the different perspectives will clash in some ways?
It's a really good question, Johannes. I don't think the mixed groups will clash. I mean, I think New Mexico is fairly diverse in itself. I mean, so it's a majority minority institution, which means it has a large percentage of Hispanic students. So the composition of students is a large percentage of Hispanic students, Indigenous students, and of course, what we refer to here as Anglo students, so white students. And so I think that composition of students lends itself to really sort of pushing and understanding these dynamics of racialization. New Mexico has its own interesting legacy of thinking about the tricultural myth. You know, Hispanics, Natives, and Anglos came together in harmony, and I think students are recognized, rightfully so, that it's a problematic myth. And so I think this only helps position them to understand the complexities of race on a global scale. And so the case studies in the class are certainly, we're looking at Europe, but we're also looking at the Caribbean, the US, and, Latin America. And so for them, understanding the broader picture of how race fits into this configuration of the world is important.
Silke Hackenesch, are you going to bring in also some of the recent problems in the German debate with you to racism, and discrimination of all kinds? In particular, also typical German and European experiences, like, for example, anti-Semitism and similar things. Is that something that will play in your seminar as well?
Yes, Johannes, absolutely. And Tiffany would be the expert on that, actually. So I think it's for my students, one of the outcomes is that race isn't something that's happening in the United States, but that processes of racialization also happen here, and that being German does not mean being white. So there's often this normative assumption that race refers to non-white people, and that is something that is happening elsewhere, or racism or police violence. So we will connect all of these conversations back to Germany as well. We'll look at the Black Lives Matter movement here. We will look at instances of xenophobia and racism here as well. And I think an outcome for the students shall definitely be that processes of racializations, constructions of race, constructions of Blackness have always been part of Western history. And also that there's always a Black presence in Europe, that this is not an aberration or unusual.
I think this is one of the advantages of that type of co-taught courses, that also the lecturer is in the position of a learner at that point.
Yeah, absolutely, Johannes. I think I'm sort of grateful to Silke for sort of mentioning we should do something like this. And then I said, of course, you're in it, I'm going to do it. And so I'm grateful for her ability to want to continually collaborate with me. And I think in this class in particular, I'm thinking of writing later on a second or third book project on Black Lives Matter in the European context. And I think this class gives me a really great foundation to think about what are the key case studies that could be featured in the book. What are some of those interconnections that I can draw out and really elaborate upon in the book? And so I'm seeing this as an opportunity to sort of think about my own research and how I can really stress, the significance of these larger dynamics of racialization at play. But then I'm also thinking about it in terms of my students. Like many of the students who are enrolled were students I've had in the past, so last spring or in the fall. And so many of them, when I said I was going to collaborate with a colleague in the University of Cologne, they were ecstatic. And they were like, oh my gosh, Dr. Florvil, I cannot believe this. I'm nervous. And I was like, don't be nervous. You'll learn, you'll grow. And so the same sort of comments that I tell them, you'll learn, you'll grow. I'm in the process of doing that too. So I think this is really helping retool my ideas about how to talk about these discussions, which are oftentimes still quite controversial here in the US and certainly in Europe. So I think this has really been useful for me. I mean, this is week 2, so we're just getting started, but I see the sort of utility in both my pedagogy and in my research.
Silke Hackenesch, Tiffany Florvil, thank you very much for this short conversation, and good luck for the course.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Johannes.